more, and I am back to read the Safe Sanctuary Policy. I'm going to start with the bottom of page 6 and continue with page 7 of the Safe Sanctuary Policy under the Texas Annual Conference Administration with the United Methodist Denomination in Houston, Texas. I grew up and was raised within the Texas Annual Conference Administration. My father, who was John Chester Dowden, and my mother, Grace Dowden. My father was employed under the Texas Annual Conference Administration in Houston, Texas. And my father was a child molester. He was not the only sexual predator that the Texas Annual Conference has employed, or he was not the only clergy who was capable of sexually assaulting a child or a woman who the Texas Annual Conference of the United Methodist Denomination has employed. And there are 3 clergy who have been charged with crimes that were employed under the Texas Annual Conference Administration. One committed murder. That was Michael Tabb. He brutally beat his wife in a Methodist parsonage in Troop, Texas. And that was back in the early 2000s, before the First United Methodist Church in Troop separated from the Texas Annual Conference during the division of the Texas Conference and the Global Methodist Denomination. There was also Kirby John Caldwell, who was indicted for wire fraud. And there was Kendall Graham, who was convicted for sexually assaulting a minor. And he was employed at a church in the Beaumont area. He wasn't employed at the church. He was employed under the Texas Annual Conference Administration and placed on assignment at a Methodist church, a United Methodist denomination, a United Methodist congregation under the Texas Annual Conference Administration with the United Methodist Denomination. So I'm going to begin reading this. Also, I went through a custody trial, and I had to go before a judge that had a history of deliberately ruling against women because he hated women, and it was Judge Charlie Prime. My ex-husband falsely accused me of dropping our youngest son on his head, which never happened. I fell with Kevin when he was a toddler. I had gone to a furniture store because I wasn't going to get my divorce settlement yet. And I was going to get a couch because I needed furniture. And so I was going back to refund the couch. And I had grabbed Kevin, he was a toddler at the time, out of the car, and I was holding him, and I stepped off the curb, and as I stepped off the curb, I went down. I landed on my knee, and because of the momentum, Kevin, my son, who was a toddler at the time, he fell back, and the back of his head hit the asphalt, and he had a skull fracture. I immediately called 911, and they came over, and they said, well, he seems fine. You can just go home, or if you want, we can take you to an ER. I opted to take him to the emergency room to get him checked out. During that night, Carl Edward Anthony, along with our older son, Alex, was escorted out of the ER by law enforcement because he was being abusive while I was trying to care for our toddler who had a skull fracture because I fell. The court documents said that I could not have custody of our kids for their health and safety. But there were never any criminal charges. There's no history of arrest. And I already had evidence of child abuse, which was never submitted. My family law attorney, Elsie Martin Simon, was representing me. I had been warned by two separate attorneys. One was Harrison Fisher and one was Elsie Martin Simon, because I had been exposing the Texas Annual Conference and their history of sweeping sexual assault from their clergy under the rug. And I was also exposing the history of the Texas Annual Conference employing clergy who were capable of sexually assaulting minors. They have a history of employing clergy who are capable of grooming and sexually assaulting minors, one of them being my father, John Chester Dowden. I also experienced retaliation from the Texas Annual Conference, and I was warned by Elsie Martin Simon and also by Harrison Fisher. Harrison Fisher had told me that the Texas Annual Conference would tell the court or the public that I was mentally ill and incapable of taking care of our kids. And of course, if they had or if they did, that would be coming from a large administration that has a history of employing clergy who are capable of grooming and sexually assaulting little girls, and one who actually murdered his wife. So I guess they would be experts on what a fit parent would be, wouldn't they? During this time, Scott Jones, so there was Bishop Huey. I met with Bishop Huey in 2010. After Bishop Huey, there was Scott Jones, who is now the bishop of the Global Methodist Denomination. And now the current bishop of the Texas Annual Conference is Cynthia Harvey. Now, I do understand I did deserve to go through all of this. I deserved the sexual harassment from my father. And I can see how the Texas Annual Conference would see that anybody that is a sexual assault survivor of their clergy is disposable and just garbage. I can totally see how they would feel that way. Because, I mean, after all, anybody who survives sexual assault from the clergy employed under the Texas Annual Conference is really nothing more than an embarrassment to them, even though they also have a history of allowing clergy to come back who have been accused or been the target of a lawsuit for sexual harassment. I don't know, maybe a clergy who probably has a PhD and has served at large churches, and those large churches like him and want him on their staff. And the Texas Annual Conference is not going to, even though they have authority, more authority than these large churches, because these large churches are under their administration, they can refuse to place a clergy on staff there. But they are not going to go against these large churches because that could affect their revenue, because these churches pay apportionments annually. And that could be a loss of income for this administration. So ethics are not quite as important as their revenue and their fiscal income every year. Also, I was ordered supervised visitation. So what Harrison Fisher predicted actually came true, because at the time I did not understand how the Texas Annual Conference could interfere with my custody trial and influence how my custody trial turned out. The way that it did was that I had two attorneys representing me. And this, an interesting fact about that is I was deemed mentally ill or mentally incompetent by Harrison Fisher and Elsie Martin Simon and other clergy, including the Texas Annual Conference, because, I guess it was very convenient for them. And this was not on their bingo card that I would one day talk about it on social media. And so, what's interesting about this is that I was deemed mentally ill, but I guess it doesn't really matter, right? Because then they can just chalk it up to, well, she's talking about it, but, she's not all there, kind of thing. But that's okay, because far worse things have been said to me. Like my own mother, who was a Methodist minister's wife, telling me that she and my father drugged me with codeine so that my father could sexually assault me when I was a little girl. I mean, that's not that big of a deal to the conference administration, or maybe it is, which is why they went to great efforts to retaliate. And so Harrison Fisher had told me that the Texas conference would interfere and that they would tell the public or the court, whoever, that I was mentally incompetent of caring for our sons because, they are experts after employing child molesters, right? And Elsie Martin Simon had told me in one of our meetings, she said that I needed to be careful exposing the Texas Annual Conference because I did not know which legal official was involved with the Texas Annual Conference, okay? Well, I didn't understand, and I am just not somebody who's going to back down from a challenge, especially if I think that there is some great injustice that has affected me, because honestly, the only people I really care about are my kids and my husband. I really don't care about anybody else, to be honest, because it's not like too many people have really cared about my well-being. So why should I care? Anyway, I didn't understand at the time because I was exposing corruption. I was exposing a multi-billion-dollar administration employing child molesters, one of them being my father. And I mean, the Texas conference has private investigators. They could have, found some way to do a better job in getting rid of me, which clearly they didn't do a very good job of that. And I was talking to Elsie and I said, so, she's told me to keep my mouth shut about the Texas Annual Conference or else. So my response to that was, or else what? You see, I knew I was going before Judge Prine. So I knew there was a high probability I was going to lose custody simply because Judge Prine hated women. There was a woman named Kathy Barnes who had to go before Judge Prine, and her 5-year-old had tested positive for cocaine. And that her 5-year-old had obtained the cocaine from his father's possession because it was his father's cocaine. It took Kathy Barnes a year to get custody of her son back, and she was not exposing a multi-billion-dollar administration for sexual assault that interfered in her custody trial. So it was very convenient for the Texas Annual Conference that I had to go before a judge that hated women and deliberately ruled against women, even if it meant overlooking the well-being of the child. So I had emailed Elsie Martin Simon and asked her, because Judge Prine, because of the fact that it was on record, Kathy Barnes' attorney went to the media, and Randy Wallace did a news story on it, and it cost Judge Prine his election. So then a new judge was elected in the place of Charlie Prine. And she was going to start in January of 2019. I knew it was very close to that, so I emailed Elsie Martin Simon. I had been warned by multiple attorneys of Judge Prine's history of deliberately ruling against women because he hated women. So I knew what I was going up against. And so I had emailed Elsie Martin Simon before the trial. I asked if the trial could be moved to January, because I was very concerned about the fact that I was going to have to go before Judge Prine. And I had evidence of child abuse, like, Carl being reported for dragging our son 5 feet across the carpet, physically injuring him, giving him carpet burn, and not seeking medical treatment. Sounds like he already qualifies to work as a United Methodist minister for the Texas Annual Conference Administration. I guess they could consider him as a candidate for ordained ministry. He also, I obtained a recording of Alex describing his father putting his hands around his throat. And Alex's words were that his father tried to choke him and kill him. Of course, nothing was done about it because, why would they? And, I guess that's another qualification that the Texas Annual Conference could take into consideration Carl as a candidate for ordination for ordained ministry. He's already got a bachelor's degree, because it would be right up their alley, I guess. Anyway, I digress. So I was going through all of this, and I had no support system. I had zero support system. I had told Elsie Martin Simon also what I had heard about Judge Prine, about his history about deliberately ruling against women. She told me that wasn't true. I took her at her word. I trusted her because we came from the same people. I mean, she grew up in the Texas Annual Conference. She was a former preacher's kid. So, I trusted her. And at the end of the trial, nothing was presented. It was determined that I was mentally ill, and there was never a psych evaluation ordered. Because I guess Carl Edward Anthony, who would abuse our kids behind closed doors, I guess Harris County feels that his word is golden. So that is what happened. By the end of that week, because I had no one to support me, no one to sit with me, I was spent. I was on the verge of a breakdown. And I had it with my mental health being attacked and ripped to shreds. But, after all, I guess I deserved that, right? Because I guess I should have kept my mouth shut about the Texas Annual Conference. because they want their victims compliant with sexual assault. And at the end, I had to sign the paperwork. I had to sign the court documents. I signed the court documents out of fear. I signed the court documents under duress. I signed the court documents because I was afraid of more retaliation from the Texas Annual Conference. I signed the documents, the court documents, because I was afraid for my safety. I signed the court documents because I was afraid of more retaliation from Judge Charlie Prime. I signed documents that were falsified about my character and what kind of parent I was, falsely accusing me, because I was afraid of more retaliation. And I had no idea that at the time I knew I had been ordered supervised visitation, but I did not know that a few months later I was going to be forced to visit my kids at St. Stephen's United Methodist Church. I started out visiting my kids at South Main Baptist Church. And the first day I showed up, he didn't show up with the boys. And of course, they were going to hold him accountable. Why? Because you see, the domestic relations office loses money. Then they care. They don't really care about the safety of the kids or the parents, though. They don't care. And they don't care if one of their staff sexually harasses a parent while they're visiting. They don't care if one of the visiting parents sexually harasses another visiting parent. They don't care if they are using United Methodist churches that are under an administration that has a history of employing child molesters, and one of them actually murdered his wife. They don't care. So the first day that I showed up, Carl didn't bring the boys. I was devastated. I slid down the wall and sat there crying because I just could not do anything else. And I mean, they really should have got a video of it, because I'm sure that the Texas Annual Conference would have just been thoroughly entertained watching that. They should have also got a video of Shane sexually harassing me in front of my sons. I'm sure they really would have enjoyed that. And the Texas Annual Conference also should have got a video of Jorge, who works for the Domestic Relations Office, sexually harassing me at South Main Baptist Church, because I'm sure they would have enjoyed that. And they could have shared it with South Main Baptist Church, because I'm sure South Main Baptist Church would love to know that parents are being sexually harassed at the supervised visitation through the Domestic Relations Office on their property. Not that they would care. They would probably love to know, because they would enjoy watching, because that's how these churches are. And that's why you're finding sexual predators in churches. There are too many church leaders with a sense of entitlement, and boundaries are not important. I'm going to start with the safe sanctuary policy. Supervision of protected persons. Conference and district events shall observe the second leader rule, specifically 2 unrelated leaders per classroom and 2 leaders within the line of sight and sound in other areas. Related persons may serve together as long as one other unrelated adult is present at all times. They don't do that. They don't follow that policy. Vulnerable adults may not serve as a qualified adult for purposes of this rule. However, a vulnerable adult may be included as a helper upon special approval from the event leader and with training. To eliminate secrecy or isolation, each room used for the care of protected persons should have observation windows or doors with windows. Windows should remain uncovered. If windows are not possible, doors should remain open. Half doors are recommended for use with younger children. Oh, okay. I lost it. Okay. All right, here we go. Unused rooms should remain locked. Any one-to-one mentoring or consulting should be conducted in sight and sound of another leader. One leader may be in contact with multiple youth, 6th through 12th grade, if they are in the line of sight and sound of other leaders at all times. Children shall not be one-on-one with each other out of the line of sight and sound of a leader or designated adult. Those working with children and youth must be a minimum of 5 years older than the youth they are serving. Local congregations who participate in conference or district events must provide at least 2 leaders for every 10 students who attend the event. Age-appropriate restroom supervision. Age 2 through 5th grade. If the restroom is attached to the classroom or activity room and has only one toilet, the child may go alone. If the restrooms are located away from the classroom or activity room, 2 leaders, at least one of whom must be an adult, or one adult and at least one other child or youth, should accompany the child to the restroom. Personnel should check the restroom to see if other adults are present before allowing the child to go in. If the restrooms are in a public space and in use by others, special vigilance must be taken. In a single-use restroom, an adult should remain outside the stall. If the child requires assistance in using the toilet, the adult should leave the door propped open while assisting the child to remain in line of sight with another leader. Oh, I know this doesn't happen. Sure as hell didn't happen with me at First United Methodist Church in Marshall, Texas. I blacked out because I was being sexually abused at the time. We were both in the stall, and the stall was locked. But, after all, I'm a veteran at sexual assault, right? I guess I deserved it. Is that what I was born for? In case they haven't figured out, that would be a question for the Texas Annual Conference, because they seem to be experts on who they think deserve abuse. 6th grade through 12th grade. Youth may go alone to the restroom if the restroom is adjacent to the classroom or activity room or a short distance away. Groups of adolescents must always be supervised in the restroom. An adult should stand just outside the door of the restroom, or adults should make frequent and random checks of activity within the restroom. If the restrooms are located some distance from the activity or classroom, 2 leaders, at least one of whom must be an adult, and 1 youth should accompany the youth to the restroom. Vulnerable adults. Restroom assistance for vulnerable adults shall be handled on a case-by-case basis, dependent on their specific needs. For safety and accountability, the 2-leader rule applies. I tell you what. So I said that I walked in wearing video cameras during the supervised visitation because I figured out that was the only way I could document my experience in the supervised visitation and document what went on with my kids, because I couldn't see what they were writing. I didn't know what they were writing. And for all I knew, since documents had to be falsified to get me in there, then that didn't mean that documents couldn't be falsified to keep me in there. So I couldn't take these cameras off when I went to the restroom, because then I took the chance of breaking it, because that actually happened. So I started using the restroom with those cameras, those body cameras on me. So I have video footage of myself having a bowel movement on the toilet. What I could do is share that with the Texas Annual Conference, because since they are experts on my cognitive abilities, then they could decide if they feel that I am a special adult who needs to be watched while I'm in the restroom. Okay, supervision of off-site and overnight events, trips, retreats, and overnight requirements. All off-site and overnight events and room assignments are approved by conference district staff or their designees. Okay, I personally would not send kids to camp. With my knowledge of what goes on and what could go on, and the negligence of the policies within the Texas Annual Conference, I would not trust sending kids to any camp within the Texas Annual Conference, or any church for that matter, unless you're going yourself so that you can see exactly what is going on with your child. Knowledge is power. Okay, number 1, there must be at least 2 screened unrelated leaders present for all trips, retreats, and other events where the protected persons gather overnight at or away from the designated campus. 2, at least one of the leaders must be 25 years old or older. Okay. 3, there must be at least 2 qualified adults present for every 10 protected persons attending the event. 4, there will be at least 1 screened leader for each gender present at co-ed overnight events, at single gender overnight events. At least one of the 2 screened leaders present shall be of the same gender as the protected persons who are present. 5, The person in charge of protecting persons for each overnight trip and or retreat shall carry parental permission forms, including permission for emergency medical care. And that's all I have for tonight, covering the Safe Sanctuary policy, and once again, telling the story of how I lost custody and how the Texas Annual Conference has a history of retaliating against a sexual assault survivor, and how they have a history of employing clergy who are capable of grooming children so that these children can be sexually assaulted by them.